Hi everybody. I'm currently exiting Tilanqiao Station in Hongkou district of Shanghai. I don't go here to Hongkou very much. It's on the other side of the river from where I live, and it's not very near any of the major attractions in Shanghai, like the city center. But I'm here today for a very specific reason. To go to a very special but kind of sad place. You see, this area of Shanghai, this historic area of Shanghai, was once the Shanghai ghetto, in which many Jewish refugees lived here in Shanghai in horrible conditions during World War II. And today, this place is the Shanghai Jewish Refugees Museum. Jewish refugees in Shanghai, I can hear you saying? Yeah, it's not a very well-known part of history, but it's real. The Jewish community in Shanghai actually goes back to before the time of refugees from the Nazis. This area here was once the Moshi Synagogue. Moshi, I'm sorry, my Hebrew sucks. I don't know Hebrew, so I'm totally faking my way through these pronunciations. Either way, the point is, the synagogue was founded here in 1907 by Russian Ashkenazi Jews who were coming here presumably to escape the pogroms of the Tsar. So it had been here for a while, the Jewish community. Of course, the rise of the Nazis in Germany only increased the number of Jews who sought to escape Europe. And one place that many of them escaped to was Shanghai, because it was fairly easy to get to Shanghai. You didn't usually need a visa if you were going to live in the European concessions. These areas were under the control of governments like the British and French government. And so it was a place where the Jews could be safe. Many of them escaped here, and their lives were fairly okay for a time in Shanghai, until Japan entered the war against the West after the bombing of Pearl Harbor. That changed everything. All of a sudden, they took over the concessions from the European powers, and they required all the Jews to live in this ghetto. This was under the influence of the Nazis, who basically told their allies in Japan, you should rough up the Jews a bit. Worse even, they eventually petitioned for the Japanese government to hand them over to Germany. But that never happened. One good thing in this story. Let's learn more of the story by going inside. I won't be able to film everywhere. It's forbidden in certain areas of the museum, but I will film what I can. We're in the museum now. And up here I can see a no photography sign. So I'll catch up with you in a bit. I've just exited the building. It was absolutely full of displays, which unfortunately, no, I could not film. But let's just talk a bit about what I saw. First thing I saw was a film, a short film, telling me about the suffering of the Jews in Europe, especially after Kristallnacht, and how many of them sought to flee, but were refused by most Western countries. Instead, they found that Shanghai was an open port where they could take refuge. An open port, but still not an easy one to get to. because the Germans made emigration difficult for the Jews. Even as they declared the Jews undesirable, they made it difficult for them to leave. They had to get many documents. A lot of them struggled to do so, but some managed it and fled to Shanghai, mostly by ship. There were displays showing some of the ports they passed through, such as Naples and Mumbai, or Bombay it would have been called then, on their way to Shanghai. The displays also said how most of them were penniless when they arrived and had to live in dormitories. They were housed by local rabbis who had been in Shanghai for a time already, at the time that the Nazis took power. And it spoke of some happy things too, of Jews who found love there, with other Jews mostly, though occasionally there were stories of interfaith marriages with Christians or with local Chinese, most of whom were Buddhists. It also spoke of the difficulty when the Japanese took power and created what they called the designated zone, the designated area, which is basically just a ghetto. How the Jews were considered stateless refugees since the Nuremberg decrees had revoked their German citizenship. How these stateless refugees were not permitted to leave this designated area, and how it became squalid here due to lack of economic opportunity and due to poor hygiene. But that in the end, despite the desire of the Germans that it happen, no final solution, as they called it, was implemented in Shanghai. And so most of them survived. Most of the Jews who escaped to Shanghai survived. It also spoke of how most of them left Shanghai after the war, went to reunite with family. They went to the United States, to Canada, to Australia, and perhaps not surprisingly, a number of them emigrated to Israel, since this state, of course, was founded not long after the end of World War II. It also told the story of a very small number of them who actually remained in Shanghai even after the founding of the People's Republic, and a very small number who became naturalized Chinese citizens and even members of the Chinese Communist Party. This, of course, was a very, very small number. But it is part of the story. These walls are inscribed with the names of as many of the Jewish refugees as they've been able to find. They acknowledge that their sources are limited and that more names may need to be added in the future. But here are the names. a story about how some of them lived and survived. Well, this makes my adjustment to China back in 2008 seem relatively mild. More about the poverty these people experienced. This quote seems to emphasize the difficulty of living in a new place, but also the relief of freedom and safety. A statue in commemoration of the refugees, with one holding a menorah. Though I only learned this year that is not a Hanukkah menorah, because it would have to have 4 candles on each side, so that you can have a total of 8 on the sides. One for each night of Hanukkah. Until recently, I didn't know that was a thing, that there were menorahs that were not Hanukkah menorahs. This story is a fascinating one because, you see, there was a Chinese consul in Vienna, He Fengshan, who defied orders and gave many Jews visas to China. And although Shanghai didn't require visas at the time, Jewish refugees did need them because the German authorities or the Austrian authorities would not permit them to leave without one. And so it's believed that He saved many lives by granting those visas. This museum has received guests from these countries. Look at all these flags. We've got a veritable United Nations here. Beautiful. And here's a fascinating display here. A trilingual plaque from the free and Hanseatic city of Hamburg, in Chinese, in English, in German, commemorating those who took refuge from Hamburg during the time of the Nazi persecution. And this building here is the Oil Moshi Synagogue. Pardon my pronunciation. I truly do not know how to say it, and I have approximated the best I possibly can. The synagogue was built here before the arrival of the Jewish refugees from the Nazis. Built by refugees, built by Jewish immigrants from Russia, who might well also be called refugees given the pogroms that were happening in Russia at the time. And this became the center of the Jewish community and ultimately the Jewish ghetto when the Japanese invaders established it. There don't seem to be any signs prohibiting filming in this building, so I will. As far as I know, this building has not housed religious services for many, many years. It's rather part of the museum now. But it's certainly fascinating to imagine what it might have looked like back in the 30s and 40s. The second floor has a display about what they call Jewish Friends of the Communist Party of China. It also gives a chance to look out as from a balcony over the synagogue. That's the end of my visit here. The exit gate is right here. I don't normally visit such solemn places as this on my channel, but I felt it would be worth looking at it here. I hope we will not forget the lessons that things like this teach, especially in the time when it seems like there's so much nationalism in the world again. We might remember that dividing ourselves doesn't accomplish anything and hurts so many people, that we would choose a better way to seek understanding with each other and to live together, that peace and love might ultimately prevail. I'm not going to end this video with my usual spiel. I don't feel like promoting my channel in a case like this. So, goodbye. Maybe see you another time. Thank you so much for watching.